The audio exploded in the living room like a thunderclap, cruel jokes about a sick woman, and the voice seemed to be hers. He stood up, furious, and threw her out without a second thought. But what no one imagined was that the recording was a lie, and that, upon discovering the truth, the man who had humiliated her would never sleep soundly again. Part 1. The audio echoed like thunder inside the silent living room of the ranch estate. Cruel words, mockery of a sick woman, and the voice was hers. At least it sounded like it. They were all there, the staff, the business partners, even distant relatives, witnesses to what happened next. Ethan Hayes, 32, heir to a luxury hotel chain and known for his cold, pragmatic demeanor, rose from the dining room table, his eyes flashing with fury. He walked to the head of the table where Hope was serving the wine as she did every night, and with a sharp, unforgiving gesture, he pointed to the door. "Get out of my house, now! You're fired." She said nothing. She just set down the bottle, lowered her glassy eyes, and left. No one understood, not even her. Hope, Grace Miller, was 25 and had come from a small town in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, where she had learned from her grandmother to cook with soul and respect the silence of those who suffer. She was reserved, extremely observant, and possessed a gentleness that seemed ancient, like a handwritten letter. Her fair skin contrasted with the deep green of her eyes, which shone like jade when she smiled. She was petite, with delicate movements, and had a soft way of speaking that made people feel heard. Her long brown hair was always gathered in a simple braid, and her small, well-kept hands revealed her meticulous nature. Her internal conflict was the constant fear of being rejected by those she loved, an echo of her father's abandonment, who left without a backward glance when she was just 8. Deep down, she believed she was too easy to forget. That night, faced with public humiliation, something inside her broke, not because of the job, but because of the way it was done, because of him. Hope wasn't just another employee. Since entering that house 6 months ago, she had been caring for Ethan's mother as if she were her own. She taught the ailing woman old recipes, combed her silver hair with infinite patience, and read poetry to her in a low voice as the afternoon faded. And little by little, Ethan himself, with his distant posture, had begun to draw closer. He would ask for suggestions for breakfast, notice the delicately folded blankets on his mother's armchair, and even managed to smile, a rare thing for him. Ethan was an imposing man, standing at 6'1", with a presence that commanded effortless respect. His fair skin had a golden tan from the Texas sun, and his steel blue eyes could be as cold as ice or as warm as the sea, depending on his mood. His black hair, always perfectly slicked back, revealed a broad forehead and strong features that spoke of generations of powerful men. His hands were large and masculine, yet surprisingly gentle when he played the piano on lonely evenings. He had inherited not only the family fortune, but also the emotional scars of an absent father, who had raised him with harshness, convincing him that showing emotion was a sign of weakness. His mother, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, had been his only source of affection, and watching her slowly deteriorate from her illness was killing him in silence. In the days following Hope's departure, the ranch was plunged into a heavy silence. The sprawling Southern-style mansion, with its high ceilings and patios shaded by crepe myrtles, seemed to have lost its soul. Mrs. Eleanor suddenly worsened. Ethan began to avoid the hallways, the garden with its ancient pecan trees, the grand piano in the living room. Something was eating at him from the inside, and it wasn't just regret, it was doubt. Hope had come to the estate recommended by Reverend Michael, the town's pastor. She came from a humble family. Her mother had died when she was 15, leaving her alone with her grandmother Rose, a folk healer respected throughout the region. When her grandmother died 2 years later, Hope was left completely alone, with no family other than the herbal medicine recipes and prayers she had learned. She had worked for wealthy families in New York City before coming to Austin, but she had never found a place where she felt at home until the Hayes estate. Mrs. Eleanor had welcomed her with an unusual warmth, as if she had been waiting for her whole life. "My dear," she had said that first night, taking her hands, "you have the hands of someone who knows how to heal. Stay with me." And Hope had stayed. Not just for the job, but because in that house she had found something she didn't know she was looking for. A place where her gentleness wasn't seen as weakness, where her knowledge of medicinal herbs was valued, where her presence seemed to bring peace. Ethan had started to notice her from the second week. First it was small details, the way she prepared chamomile tea for his mother, how she hummed old folk songs while she cleaned, the way the birds in the garden would approach without fear when she watered the flowers. Then it was her soft laughter, when Mrs. Eleanor told stories of her youth, or the way her green eyes shone when she spoke of her hometown's traditions. One afternoon, he had found her in the library, reading a book on medicinal plants. He had stood watching her from the doorway, fascinated by the concentration with which she studied each page, taking notes in her neat, round handwriting. When she looked up and caught him watching, her cheeks had flushed pink, and she had mumbled an apology for using his books. "Don't apologize," he had replied, surprised by the softness of his own voice. "You can read whatever you like." That had been their first real conversation, and from then on, the talks had become more frequent. Ethan had discovered that behind Hope's sweet and submissive appearance hid a brilliant mind and a strength that fascinated him. She spoke of natural medicine with the passion of a scientist, knew American history better than many academics, and had a wisdom about life that he envied. But it was on the night of Mrs. Eleanor's birthday that everything changed. Hope had prepared a special dinner with all of the woman's favorite dishes, decorated the dining room with flowers from the garden, and convinced Ethan to play the piano after dinner. For the first time in years, the house had been filled with genuine laughter. Mrs. Eleanor had cried with happiness, and Ethan had seen Hope watching them with a smile he couldn't interpret then, but which he understood now. It was the smile of someone who had found a family. That night, after his mother had gone to bed, he had found Hope in the kitchen washing dishes. Without a word, he had picked up a towel and started to dry. They worked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, charged with something indefinable but real. "Thank you," he had finally murmured. "For what?" she had asked, without stopping her work. "For making her happy, for making this house feel like a home again." Hope had stopped moving. Her hands remained motionless in the soapy water as she processed his words. When she finally looked at him, her green eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She makes me happy too," she had whispered. "You both do." Ethan had felt something stir in his chest, something that had been dormant for years. He had taken a step toward her, and for a moment the world had shrunk to the space between them, filled with possibilities and silent promises. But then the phone had rung, shattering the moment. It was an urgent business call, and by the time Ethan had finished, Hope had already retired to her room. The next day they both acted as if nothing had happened, but something fundamental had changed between them. The following weeks had been a subtle dance of approach and resistance. Ethan found excuses to be near her. He checked the pantry when he knew she would be there, lingered in the hallways he knew she would pass through, and had even started taking his meals in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room, just to hear her talk with Mrs. Eleanor. Hope, for her part, had begun to notice small changes in him. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her, how his voice lost its business-like edge when he spoke to her, the way he had started playing the piano more frequently, as if he knew she liked to listen. One rainy afternoon, while Hope was caring for Mrs. Eleanor, who had had a particularly difficult day, Ethan had appeared at the bedroom door with 2 cups of tea. He had sat in silence on the other side of the bed, watching how Hope moistened his mother's lips with infinite patience. "Where did you learn to care for the sick like that?" he had asked in a low voice. "From my grandmother," she had replied without looking up. "She used to say that caring for someone who is suffering is a sacred act, that we should do it as if we were angels. And do you think you are one? An angel?" Hope had looked up then, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "No, Mr. Hayes, I'm just a woman who knows what it's like to need care and not have it." The brutal honesty of her answer had hit him like a fist to the gut. In that moment he understood that behind all that gentleness was a deep wound, a loneliness he recognized because it was similar to his own. That night, after Hope had retired, Ethan had stayed awake for hours thinking about her, about the way her hands trembled slightly when she was nervous, how she hummed songs from her hometown when she thought no one was listening, the way her eyes filled with an ancient sadness when she thought no one was watching. He had realized that he could no longer imagine the house without her. More than that, he couldn't imagine himself without her. But just as he had begun to consider the possibility that his feelings might be reciprocated, that fateful night arrived. The night of the fake audio that destroyed everything in seconds. It was Mr. Arthur Vance, the main partner in the hotels, who brought the proof. A voice note where Hope was supposedly heard mocking Mrs. Eleanor, calling her a crazy old woman and a useless burden, laughing at her illness and saying terrible things about the Hayes family. "You need to hear this, Ethan," Mr. Vance had said with false concern. "My wife sent it to me. It seems your little caregiver isn't as angelic as she appears." The audio was devastating. The voice sounded exactly like Hope's, with the same soft Appalachian accent, the same inflections. It said things so cruel that Ethan had felt physically nauseous listening to it. But what had killed him the most was the end of the audio where Hope's voice said, "And the funniest part is that the idiot's son is already starting to fall for me. These rich guys are so easy to manipulate. A few tears, a little sweetness, and they're eating out of the palm of your hand." The betrayal had been so complete, so perfect, that Ethan had felt as if his heart had been ripped from his chest. Everything he had begun to feel for her had instantly transformed into rage and humiliation. Without thinking, he had played the audio in front of everyone present at the family dinner. He had wanted to humiliate her, as he felt humiliated. He had wanted everyone to know what kind of snake he had been harboring in his house. Hope's reaction had been what confused him the most afterward. She hadn't screamed, hadn't protested her innocence, hadn't cried hysterically, as one might expect from someone caught in the act. She had simply turned white as a sheet, stared at the phone playing the audio with an expression of absolute shock, and then looked at him with a sadness so profound that for a moment he had hesitated. But the rage had been stronger than the doubt, and he had thrown her out. It was William, the gardener and family confidant for 30 years, who dared to speak up 3 days later. Ethan was in his study, drinking whiskey and trying to ignore the pained groans of his mother, who had dramatically worsened since Hope's departure. "Sir," William had said from the doorway, his hat in his hands, "I need to tell you something. If it's about her, I don't want to hear it," Ethan had replied without looking up. "It's about the security cameras, sir." Ethan had looked up sharply. William had approached with a grave expression and placed a USB drive on the desk. "I checked the recordings from the night of the audio. Miss Hope wasn't in the house when that was supposedly recorded. She was at the pharmacy in town, picking up medicine for your mother. I have the recordings from the exterior cameras showing her leaving at 7 and coming back at 9:30. The audio file is time-stamped at 8:15. Ethan's world tilted. "Are you sure?" "Completely, sir, and there's something else." William had lowered his voice. "I've seen Miss Patricia, Mr. Vance's cousin, practicing voice imitations in the garden. She has a natural talent for it. And ever since Miss Hope arrived, she hasn't stopped saying she doesn't like you paying so much attention to some nobody from the sticks. Patricia Trish Vance, 28, Mr. Vance's cousin, and eternal aspirant to become Mrs. Hayes. Blonde, elegant, from a good family, but with a poisonous heart she had concealed for years." Ethan then recalled the hateful glances Trish would give Hope when she thought no one was watching, the subtly disparaging comments about the help getting too big for her britches. The truth hit him like a bolt of lightning. Trish had faked the audio using her talent for mimicry, convinced her cousin Arthur to present it to Ethan, and had succeeded in destroying the most beautiful thing that had begun to grow in that house. And he, like an idiot, had fallen for it. The remorse was so intense he threw up. He ran to the bathroom and emptied his stomach as the images of that night replayed in his mind. Hope's shocked face, the way she had trembled when he had pointed at her, the dignity with which she had left the house without uttering a single word in her defense. He had run to her room, but it was too late. Her few belongings were gone. William had told him she had taken the night bus, but he didn't know where to. "She left just as she came, sir," the old gardener had said sadly, "with a small suitcase and a broken heart. Have you ever felt your world fall apart over a misunderstanding? Do you believe forgiveness is possible when the damage seems irreparable? Let us know what city you're watching from and share your experience. Don't forget to subscribe to find out if Ethan manages to find Hope." Chapter 2, Part 2. For 6 months, Ethan Hayes became an obsessed man. The ranch estate, once full of life and music, had transformed into a silent mausoleum where every corner reminded him of Hope. The piano remained closed, covered by a thin layer of dust. The wisteria in the garden grew wild, without the delicate care she had given them. And Mrs. Eleanor faded day by day, constantly asking for her girl, as she had started calling Hope in their last weeks together. Ethan had fired Patricia Vance in a blaze of fury after discovering her betrayal. The confrontation had been brutal, but she had defended herself without a shred of remorse. "So what if I did it?" she had screamed, her eyes shining with hatred. "Did you really think I was going to let some maid take what is mine by right? I'm from your world, Ethan. She's a nobody. She is worth more than you and your entire family combined," he had replied, with a coldness that had made Patricia tremble. "And you were never, and will never be, mine." Mr. Vance had tried to mediate, but Ethan had been relentless. He had not only severed all business ties with the Vances, but had also threatened to destroy their reputation throughout the state if Patricia ever dared to show her face in his social circle again. But revenge had not eased the pain. Nothing did. Ethan had hired 3 different private investigators. He had personally driven through small towns in the Appalachians, asking about a young woman with green eyes who made herbal remedies. He had visited hospitals, convents, non-profits, women's shelters. He had placed ads in local newspapers and even offered a $10,000 reward for information on her whereabouts. Nothing. It was as if Hope Grace Miller had vanished from the face of the earth. His days began to follow an obsessive routine. Wake up before dawn, check his phone hoping for a call from the investigators, have breakfast with his mother, who barely touched her food and kept asking for Hope. Go to the office where he could barely concentrate enough to keep the business running, and then dedicate his evenings to searching for her. The estate staff watched him with growing concern. He had lost weight, had deep dark circles under his eyes, and his temper, once controllably cold, had become unpredictable. One day, he could be completely withdrawn, and the next, he would explode over the smallest thing. William was the only one who dared to speak to him directly about his state. "Sir, you're killing yourself," he had said one afternoon, finding him in the garden staring intently at the rosebush Hope had planted. "She wouldn't want to see you like this." "And how would you know what she'd want?" Ethan had retorted bitterly. "We know nothing about her. I knew nothing about her when she was here." "You knew the most important thing, sir. You knew she loved you." William's words had struck him like lightning. "What did you say?" The old gardener had smiled sadly. "Do you think I'm blind, sir? The way she looked at you when you played the piano, the way her face lit up when you came home from work. A woman doesn't care for a man's mother the way she cared for Mrs. Eleanor. If she doesn't feel something very deep for him, then why didn't she defend herself? Why didn't she tell me the audio was fake? Because she's used to not being believed, sir. Because she comes from a world where a poor woman's word is worth less than nothing against that of rich folks. Because she expected you to know her well enough to know she was incapable of such cruelty." The truth of those words was like a knife to the heart. Ethan realized he had failed the most important test of his life. When Hope had needed him most, when she had required him to trust her, he had chosen to believe appearances over the knowledge of the heart. It was Mrs. Eleanor who, in one of her lucid moments, gave him the clue he needed. It was a rainy October afternoon, and Ethan was sitting by his mother's bed, reading her one of the poetry books Hope used to read to her. Mrs. Eleanor had been sleeping, but she suddenly opened her eyes and looked at him with a clarity she hadn't had in weeks. "Son," she murmured, her voice weak but firm, "have you found my girl yet?" "Mom, I'm looking for her. I promise I'll find her." "You won't find her by looking in the obvious places," Mrs. Eleanor said, taking his hand with surprising strength. "Hope is like a wildflower. When she's hurt, she doesn't look for manicured gardens. She looks for places where she can heal in peace, where she can be useful without being judged." "What do you mean, Mom?" "Look in places where people need healing, not hospitals or big clinics. Small, humble places where a woman like her can use her gifts without anyone asking questions about her past." His mother's words were a revelation. Ethan had been looking in all the wrong places. He had been thinking like a businessman, not like someone who knew Hope's heart. The next day he changed his strategy. Instead of searching in cities, he started visiting small towns, especially those known for their hot springs or traditions of folk medicine. Instead of offering rewards, which might scare off someone in hiding, he began to make subtle inquiries about young healers or women who worked with medicinal herbs. He visited rustic spas in the outskirts of Austin, small inns in the hills of Texas, and communities where healing traditions were still alive. In each place, he described Hope without mentioning her name, asking if they knew anyone with her characteristics. He was about to give up when, on a desperate trip to the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas, he decided to spend the night at a rustic lodge near a spring known for its healing properties. The place was simple but cozy, surrounded by pine trees and the constant sound of water running over rocks. He arrived late, and the receptionist, an older woman with a kind face, explained that dinner service was over, but perhaps the kitchen could whip up something light for him. "Just ask Hope," the woman said casually. "She's always got something simmering for guests who get in late." Ethan's heart stopped. "Hope?" "Yes, the young woman who cooks. An absolute gem. She arrived a few months ago, and since then, the guests can't stop praising her food. And don't even get me started on her healing teas." Ethan had to lean against the counter to keep from falling. Could you tell her there's a guest who would like some dinner?" "Of course, young man. Go on out to the terrace and she'll bring you something in a moment." Ethan walked to the terrace with trembling legs. The terrace overlooked the spring, and the sound of the water and the chirping of crickets created a nocturnal symphony that under other circumstances he would have found relaxing. But right then, his heart was beating so loudly he could hardly hear anything else. He sat with his back to the kitchen, afraid that if she saw him first she might run. He waited, counting every second, until he heard soft footsteps on the terrace tiles. "Good evening," said a voice he recognized immediately, though it sounded thinner, more tired. I brought you some beef stew and homemade bread. Would you like something to drink? I have fresh brewed iced tea, or I can make you a—" Ethan turned slowly, and there she was. Hope was thinner. He noticed that immediately. Her face, always soft, now had a sickly pallor, and there was something in her green eyes that broke his heart. A deep sadness, as if an essential part of her had died. Her hair, once always perfectly braided, was simply pulled back, and she wore an apron over a simple blue cotton dress. When she saw him, the tray slipped from her hands. The dishes shattered on the floor with a crash that broke the night's silence, but neither of them moved to pick up the pieces. They stared at each other in silence for what felt like an eternity. Hope's eyes filled with tears she didn't shed, and Ethan saw in them all the pain he had caused, the entire wound he had opened with his lack of faith. "Hope," he finally murmured, rising slowly as if he feared she would disappear if he made any sudden moves. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there was a serenity in them that surprised him. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice so soft he could barely hear it over the sound of the water. "How is Mrs. Hayes?" The question, so typical of her, worrying about others before herself, was what finally broke through Ethan's defenses. The tears he had held back for months began to stream down his cheeks. "She's dying," he replied in a broken voice. "She's waiting for you. She asks for you every day." Hope turned even paler but maintained her composure. "I'm so sorry." "No," Ethan said, taking a step toward her. "I'm sorry." "Hope, don't," she interrupted gently, raising a hand to stop him. "Not here, not like this." She looked at the broken ceramic shards scattered on the floor, then at him and sighed with a sadness that seemed to come from the very bottom of her soul. "Give me a few minutes to clean this up and let them know I'm finishing my shift. Then we can talk." Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. Hope began to pick up the broken pieces with the same delicacy she did everything, and he watched her every move, memorizing them, as if he feared she would disappear again. When she returned 20 minutes later, she had changed out of her uniform into a white sweater and a long skirt. She had let her hair down, and Ethan remembered why he had started to fall in love with her. There was a natural grace in every gesture, a serene beauty that didn't depend on makeup or expensive dresses. They sat in 2 wicker chairs facing the spring, a careful distance between them. The silence stretched, not uncomfortably, but heavy with everything unsaid. "How did you find me?" she finally asked. "Your mother gave me the clue," he replied. "She told me to look for you in places where you could heal." A sad smile crossed Hope's face. Mrs. Eleanor was always very wise. "Hope, about that night." "I already know the audio was fake," she interrupted, looking toward the water. "I found out a couple of months ago. One of the employees from a neighboring ranch told me that Trish Vance had been bragging about how well she could imitate voices." Ethan felt as if he'd been punched. "You knew and you didn't try to contact me." Hope turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw a maturity that wasn't there before, born of pain and loneliness. "What for, Ethan? The damage was already done, not by the fake audio, but by what it revealed." "I don't understand." "It revealed that you didn't really know me, that when it came to the test, you chose to believe the worst of me without even asking for my side of the story. It revealed that deep down I would always be the help to you, someone who could be disposed of without the right to a defense." The words were spoken without resentment, but with such a profound sadness that Ethan felt as though his heart were being torn out. "That's not true," he murmured. "You were never just an employee to me." "No?" Hope tilted her head, studying him. "Then what was I?" The question hung between them like a tightrope over a chasm. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but the words got stuck in his throat. What had she been to him? What was she still? In the silence that followed, Hope smiled with a sadness that broke his soul. "You can't answer, because you never really let yourself know," she said softly. "And I never let myself expect it." The sound of running water filled the ensuing silence, and Ethan understood that this conversation was just the beginning. That there were wounds that needed time to heal, truths that needed to be spoken, and an abyss of pain they would have to cross if they ever wanted to find their way back to each other. But for the first time in 6 months, he felt something akin to hope. She was there in front of him, alive and beautiful despite the pain, and maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to fix what he had broken. The night was just beginning, and with it, the possibility of redemption. Chapter 3, Part 3. Hope served 2 cups of chamomile tea, her hands moving with the same delicate grace Ethan remembered. They sat facing the spring as the full moon reflected on the thermal waters, creating a gently rippling silver mirror. The night air smelled of pine and damp earth, and in the distance the melancholic howl of a coyote could be heard. "Tell me about these past few months," Ethan said softly, needing to fill the silence with something other than the weight of his mistakes. Hope held the cup between her hands, as if needing the warmth even though the night was mild. At first I just ran. I took the first bus out of Austin without caring about the destination. I ended up in Asheville with no money, knowing no one. She paused, watching the steam from her tea dissipate into the night air. I slept in the bus station the first night. I was so scared, not of being alone, but of what I had felt when I heard that audio. For a moment I had doubted myself. I wondered if I had really said those things in a moment of weakness. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling each word like a stab. "Hope, let me finish," she said gently. "I need to tell you this." He nodded, though each word hurt more than the last. On the second day, an older woman found me cleaning tables in a cafe in exchange for food. Her name was Rose, just like my grandmother. She was a widow, had a small house with a garden full of medicinal plants, and needed help because her arthritis no longer allowed her to care for them alone. Hope's voice softened with the memory. She took me to her house that same afternoon. She didn't ask where I came from or why I was alone. She just said, "Women who know plants are sisters, no matter where they come from." I stayed with her for 3 months. "What happened then?" "She died in her sleep one night in July," Hope replied, and for the first time that night her voice broke slightly. "She was diabetic and her heart just stopped. I found her in the morning. She looked so peaceful that for a moment I thought she was just sleeping soundly." She wiped away a tear that rolled down her cheek. "Rose had no family. She left her house to the church, and I was once again left with nothing. But this time it was different. I had learned so much working with her. I had improved my knowledge of natural medicine, and I had letters of recommendation from the people we had helped." "How did you get here?" "The pastor at Rose's church knew the owner of this lodge. Mr. Miller, a different Miller, was looking for someone who knew how to cook traditional food and prepare natural remedies for the guests who come for the hot springs. He hired me immediately." Ethan watched her face as she spoke, noticing how it lit up slightly when she mentioned her work. Despite the pain she had suffered, she still found purpose in caring for others. "Are you happy here?" he asked, though he feared the answer. Hope was silent for a long time, contemplating the moon's reflection on the water. "I'm not unhappy," she finally replied. "It's a peaceful place. The people are kind, and I get to do what I love. But there's a difference between not being unhappy and being happy, between existing and living." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan felt a mixture of pain and hope. Pain because it confirmed she had been suffering. Hope because it suggested there was still room in her life for something more. "Hope," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I need you to know that since that night, I haven't had a single day of peace. That I've hated myself for not trusting you, for not knowing you well enough to know you were incapable of such cruelty." She looked him directly in the eyes for the first time that night. "And you know me now?" The question was simple, but Ethan understood it was the most important one he had ever been asked. "I know your kindness, your gentleness, your wisdom. I know the way you care for others, as if they were treasures. I know your strength, even though you try to hide it. But you're right, there's a lot about you I don't know, and that's my fault." "What do you want from me, Ethan?" she asked with a directness that surprised him. I want the chance to truly know you. I want you to come back. Not as an employee, but as the woman you are. I want my mother to be able to see you before—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Hope understood. "Is she very ill?" "The doctors say she has weeks, maybe days. She doesn't eat, barely sleeps. All she does is ask for you." Hope closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with tears. "She was the closest thing I had to a mother after mine died." "I know. And I think you were the daughter she always wanted." They remained in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Hope spoke. "There's something you need to know before I make any decision," she said, with a seriousness that put Ethan on alert. "What is it?" Hope stood up and began to walk toward the edge of the terrace, where the hot springs formed natural pools among the rocks. Ethan followed her, maintaining a respectful distance. "The night before I left," she began, not looking at him, "Mrs. Eleanor asked me to stay with her while you were in your office. She was very lucid that night, more than she had been in weeks." Ethan waited, sensing something important was coming. "She took my hands and told me something that changed everything I thought about my presence in that house," Hope continued. "She told me she had been waiting for me for years." "What do you mean?" Hope finally turned to look at him, and in her eyes was something he couldn't identify. "She told me she had a letter that had arrived 25 years ago, written by a woman named Grace Miller." Ethan's world stopped. "Your mother." "My mother," Hope confirmed, her voice trembling. "A letter where my mother told her that she had known her husband, your father, years before you were born, that they had had a relationship, And that relationship had resulted in a pregnancy. Ethan felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. No, it can't be. My mother never told me who my father was, Hope continued, ignoring his shock. She only told me he was a good man who couldn't stay with us. When I came to work at your house and saw the photographs of your father, something stirred inside me, but I never thought it could be. That would mean we're— Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. Siblings, Hope completed, and the word fell between them like a tombstone. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of water and the wind in the pines. Ethan felt as if his entire world was crumbling for the second time in less than a year. But there's more, Hope continued after a moment. Mrs. Eleanor told me she never believed the letter was real. Why? Because she knew your father better than anyone. She said he would have never abandoned a child, no matter the circumstances. And because— Hope paused as if the next words were the hardest to say. Because what? Because the letter arrived just after Trish Vance started frequenting the house, and Mrs. Eleanor always suspected that Trish or her family had fabricated that letter to create problems in the future, in case someone ever appeared who could threaten her plans to marry you. The revelation hit Ethan like a bolt of lightning. It all fit. Trish's ability to fake voices, her obsession with marrying him, her hatred for Hope. "Where is the letter?" he asked urgently. "Mrs. Eleanor told me she kept it in her safe, along with other real letters from your father to compare them. She asked that after her death, if I ever came back, we should go through all the documents together." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and fury that threatened to overwhelm him. "Trish," he murmured. "All this time, Trish. We don't know if it's true," Hope warned. "It's just Mrs. Eleanor's suspicion. But it makes sense. It all makes sense. Her desperation to keep you away from me, her knowledge of the exact moments to create maximum damage." They stood there by the spring, processing the implications of everything they had discovered. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You have to come back," he said with an urgency that surprised him. "Regardless of what we find out about that letter, my mother needs to see you, and I need the chance to prove to you that I can be the man you deserve." Hope looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the battle raging in her green eyes. Finally, she nodded. "I'll come back," she said softly. "But not for you, for her. And when it's all over, when Mrs. Eleanor is at peace and we've cleared up the truth about that letter, we'll see if there's anything left to save between us." Ethan felt his heart expand in his chest. It wasn't the forgiveness he had hoped for, but it was a chance. And after 6 months of hopelessness, a chance was more than he had dared to expect. "Thank you," he murmured, and in that one word, he poured all his gratitude, his hope, and his love. That night, as Hope packed her few belongings for the trip back, Ethan stayed awake in his lodge room, looking out the window at the moonlit spring. Tomorrow they would return to Austin together, but they both knew that the real journey, the journey back to each other, was just beginning. Chapter 4, Part 4. The journey back to Austin was made in a silence heavy with anticipation and nervousness. Hope had insisted on taking the bus, refusing Ethan's offer to drive her in his car. "I need time to prepare myself mentally," she had explained, and he had respected her decision, though he bought a ticket for the seat next to her. During the 4-hour ride, they both remained lost in their own thoughts, watching the rolling hills of Arkansas gradually transform into the cattle ranches of Texas. Hope carried a small embroidered cloth suitcase, the same one she had arrived at the estate with a year ago, and Ethan couldn't help but think how life sometimes comes full circle in the most unexpected ways. When the bus finally pulled into the Austin terminal, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that contrasted with the anxiety they both felt. Ethan had sent a message to William to let him know they were on their way, but he hadn't mentioned that Hope was with him. He wanted it to be a surprise, especially for his mother. The taxi that took them to the ranch estate drove through familiar streets in silence. Hope watched out the window at the places she had come to know during her months there, the small church where she had attended service on Sundays, the pharmacy where she had bought medicine for Mrs. Eleanor, the market where she had learned to haggle like the local women. It all seemed strangely distant, as if a decade had passed instead of 6 months. When they reached the wrought iron gates of the Hayes estate, Hope felt her heart quicken. The property looked different, less cared for, quieter. The wisteria she had meticulously pruned now grew wild, and some of the pots on the porch were empty, with dry, cracked earth. William met them at the front door, and when he saw Hope, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "Miss Hope," he murmured, taking off his straw hat and pressing it to his chest. "Thank God you've returned. The missus, she's going to be so happy." "How is she, William?" Hope asked, her voice trembling. The old gardener exchanged a look with Ethan before answering. "Very weak, miss. But since yesterday, it's like she's been waiting for something, like she knew someone was coming." Ethan took Hope's suitcase, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Do you want to see her now, or would you rather get settled first?" "Now," Hope answered without hesitation. "I've waited too long to see her." They entered the house, and Hope immediately felt the difference. The air seemed heavier, permeated with that particular stillness that accompanies serious illness. The hallways, once filled with light and the scent of fresh flowers she cut each morning, now felt somber and closed off. "She's in her room," William explained as they climbed the marble staircase. "She hasn't come down for a week. She only gets up to use the restroom, and sometimes not even that." Hope had to stop halfway up the stairs, leaning on the wrought iron banister to control her emotions. The image of Mrs. Eleanor, always so elegant and full of life despite her illness, reduced to this condition, broke her heart. Ethan approached her. "Are you okay? I just need a moment," she whispered, wiping away a tear that had started to roll down her cheek. When they reached Mrs. Eleanor's bedroom door, Ethan knocked gently before entering. "Mom, there's someone here to see you." The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by a bedside lamp that cast soft shadows on the peach-colored walls. Mrs. Eleanor lay in her mahogany bed, her small, frail figure almost lost among the white linen sheets. Her silver hair, once always perfectly coiffed, spread across the pillow in soft waves, and her face, though gaunt, retained that natural dignity that had been her hallmark all her life. At first, she seemed to be asleep, but as Hope took a step toward the bed, Mrs. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. For a moment she looked at the ceiling with the confusion typical of someone waking from a deep sleep. Then, gradually, she turned her head toward the door. When her eyes fell on Hope, something magical happened. Her face, which had been dull and expressionless, lit up as if a light had been switched on from within. A smile spread across her dry lips, and for a moment it was possible to see the vibrant woman she had been before her illness. "My girl," she murmured, her voice weak but clear. "I knew you would come back. I knew it." Hope slowly approached the bed, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She took Mrs. Eleanor's hands in hers, surprised by how cold and thin they felt, like small fragile birds. "I'm here, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm here. Come, sit with me," the older woman requested, patting the mattress beside her. "I have so much to tell you, so much to talk about." Hope sat carefully on the edge of the bed, not letting go of Mrs. Eleanor's hands. Ethan came around to the other side, taking one of his mother's free hands. "Mom," Ethan began, "Hope told me about the letter you mentioned." "About the supposed relationship between Dad and her mother?" Mrs. Eleanor nodded weakly. "Ah yes, that cursed letter. Hope, dear, did you bring the key I gave you?" Hope frowned, confused. "What key, Mrs. Eleanor?" "The night before you left when we were talking. I gave you a small key and told you to keep it safe. Don't you remember?" Hope searched her memory, and gradually, like a dissipating fog, she began to remember. She had been so disturbed by the revelation of her possible kinship with Ethan that many details of that conversation had become blurred. But now she remembered. Mrs. Eleanor had pressed something small and metallic into her palm, closing her fingers over the object. "Yes," she murmured, bringing her hand to the small cloth pouch she always wore around her neck, a gift from her grandmother that held her most precious items. Inside, along with her mother's rosary and a baby tooth she had kept for sentimental reasons, was the small golden key. She took it out and showed it to Mrs. Eleanor, who smiled with satisfaction. "That key opens a box in my dresser," Mrs. Eleanor explained. "Go get it, son," she asked Ethan. Ethan went to the antique mahogany dresser that had belonged to his great-grandmother, where Mrs. Eleanor kept her jewelry and most important documents. Among several decorative chests and boxes, he found a small metal box with mother-of-pearl inlays that he had never noticed before. "This one," Mrs. Eleanor confirmed when he showed it to her. Hope inserted the key with trembling hands. Inside the box were several folded documents, some yellowed photographs and what appeared to be a letter in a separate envelope, visibly newer than the other papers. "Take out the letter in the blue envelope first," Mrs. Eleanor instructed. Hope obeyed, carefully unfolding a sheet of paper that had yellowed slightly with time. The handwriting was feminine but shaky, as if written in a hurry or under great emotional stress. "Read it aloud," Mrs. Eleanor requested. Hope cleared her throat and began to read. "Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, my name is Grace Miller, and I'm writing to you because I don't know who else to turn to. Your husband, Mr. James Hayes, and I had a relationship some years ago before he married you. From that relationship, my daughter Hope was born. I never asked for anything, but now I am very ill and I worry about my little girl's future. I am not looking for money or recognition, Only that you know a daughter of Mr. Hayes exists in the world. If something happens to me, she will be alone. I am enclosing a photograph of her and one of Mr. Hayes that he gave me. God bless you, Grace Miller." The silence that followed was sepulchral. Ethan stood completely still, processing the implications of what they had just heard. If the letter was real, it meant he and Hope were indeed siblings. If it was fake, "Now take out the photographs," Mrs. Eleanor continued. Hope extracted 2 small, faded photographs. The first showed a young woman with dark hair and delicate features, holding a baby. Hope immediately recognized her mother, though she looked much younger than she remembered. The second photograph showed a middle-aged man with dark hair and blue eyes, smiling at the camera. Ethan took the second photograph and studied it carefully. The man in the picture vaguely resembled his father, but something was off. The eyes were the right color, but the shape was different. The nose was similar, but the chin was more pronounced. It was as if someone had tried to create an image that looked like James Hayes without actually being him. "What do you think, son?" Mrs. Eleanor asked, watching his reaction. "It's a forgery," Ethan replied with certainty. "It looks like Dad, but it's not him. The details are wrong." "Exactly," Mrs. Eleanor confirmed with satisfaction. "Now, take out the other document from the box." Hope found a more modern sheet of paper with the letterhead of a forensic lab from Dallas. It was a handwriting analysis, comparing the supposed letter from Grace Miller with authentic writing samples from the same person. The result was clear. The handwriting did not match. The letter had been written by someone else trying to imitate Grace Miller's handwriting. "But how did you get this analysis?" Hope asked, confused. 5 years ago, when Trish Vance started pressuring me to convince Ethan to marry her, she brought me this letter," Mrs. Eleanor explained. "She said she had found it among her deceased uncle's papers, who was supposedly your mother's lawyer. She claimed your mother had asked her uncle to deliver the letter after her death." Mrs. Eleanor paused to catch her breath, clearly exhausted by the effort of speaking so much, but determined to finish her explanation. "Something about the whole story sounded false from the beginning," she continued. "Trish seemed too eager to show me the letter, and too insistent that I should keep any young woman who worked in the house away. I decided to investigate on my own." "Investigate how?" "I hired a private investigator," Mrs. Eleanor replied with a faint but mischievous smile. "He found people who had known your mother, Hope. He obtained samples of her real handwriting, letters she had written to friends and neighbors. When he compared them to this letter, it was clear it was a fake." Ethan stared at the documents, feeling a mixture of relief and fury. "Trish forged this entire story to keep Hope away from me." "Not only that," Mrs. Eleanor added. "The investigator also discovered something else. Trish had been paying an actress to pose as an old friend of your mother's, Hope. This woman was the one who gave her the personal information about your family that Trish needed to make her story believable." Hope felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders, but at the same time a new anger began to grow inside her. "All this time, all this suffering for a lie. There's something else you need to know, my dear," Mrs. Eleanor said, taking Hope's hand with renewed strength. "Your real father. Did you know him?" "I knew of him," Mrs. Eleanor confirmed. "He was Michael Miller, your mother's younger brother, a good man who died in a construction accident when you were 2 years old. Your mother never married him because they were very young, and he was trying to get on his feet financially, but he adored you." Tears streamed freely down Hope's face. For the first time in her life, she had real information about her father, information not tainted by lies or manipulation. "How did you know all this?" Ethan asked, still processing the magnitude of the deception they had endured. "Because when I started investigating the fake letter, I also investigated the real history of Hope's family," Mrs. Eleanor explained. "I wanted to be sure of the truth before making any decisions. And when I learned that Hope had no blood relation to me or you, I also knew something else." "What was that?" Mrs. Eleanor looked from Ethan to Hope, her eyes shining with a mixture of motherly love and satisfaction at having protected those she loved. "I knew that fate had brought the perfect woman for my son to my house, a woman who would love him for who he is, not for what he has, a woman who would care for this family as if it were her own, a woman who would give me the grandchildren I always dreamed of." Ethan and Hope looked at each other, and for the first time since that terrible night 6 months ago, there were no barriers between them. No family secrets, no doubts about their kinship, no misunderstandings. There were only 2 people who had loved each other in silence and were finally free to acknowledge it. "But there's still something to resolve," Hope said softly, though her voice trembled with emotion. "What?" Ethan asked. "Forgiveness," she replied, looking him directly in the eye, "and trust. Because even though we now know the truth about Trish and the fake letters, the fact remains, You didn't trust me when I needed it most." Ethan felt as if he'd been stabbed, but he knew she was right. "Hope, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I'm not saying this to hurt you, but because if we're going to have any chance together, we need to face that wound and heal it. I need to know that the next time someone tries to pull us apart, you'll choose to trust what you know of my heart, instead of what your ears are told." Mrs. Eleanor watched this exchange with her eyes closed, a serene smile on her face. She seemed to be using all her remaining energy to ensure that her son and the woman she had come to love as a daughter found their way back to each other. "You're right," Ethan admitted, moving closer to Hope. "There's no excuse for what I did. Fear doesn't justify a lack of faith. Protecting my own heart doesn't justify destroying yours." He moved closer still until he could take Hope's hands in his. "I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve, that I can choose trust over fear, love over self-protection." Hope studied his face for a long moment, seeing not just his words, but the sincerity in his blue eyes. "And how are you going to prove that to me?" "By staying here with you while my mother—" Ethan couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. "And afterward, if you'll let me, by spending the rest of my life making sure you never again doubt my faith in you." In the bed, Mrs. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at them with deep satisfaction. "Now I can rest in peace," she murmured, "knowing that the two people I love most in this world will take care of each other." Hope leaned down to kiss Mrs. Eleanor's forehead. "Rest, Mrs. Eleanor, we'll be here." And for the first time in months, the Hayes estate felt like a home again. Not because the wounds were completely healed, but because there was finally hope that they could heal together. Chapter 5, Part 5. The following days unfolded in a strange mixture of sorrow and rebirth. Mrs. Eleanor seemed to have held on to life just long enough to see Hope and Ethan reunited, but now with her mission accomplished, she was visibly fading, hour by hour. Hope had naturally resumed her role as the primary caregiver, but this time was different. She was no longer the silent employee carrying out her duties without question. Now she was a woman who had found her place in this family, who spoke with authority about Mrs. Eleanor's medical care, who made decisions with the confidence of someone who knows she belongs. Ethan watched her with a mixture of admiration and love that grew each day. He saw her preparing special infusions to ease his mother's pain, saw her reading poetry in a soft voice in the afternoons, saw her patiently combing the silver hair of the woman who was slowly slipping away. And in every gesture, every moment of tenderness, he saw confirmation of everything he had lost during those 6 months of separation. One afternoon, while Mrs. Eleanor slept, Ethan found Hope in the garden, tending to the plants that had grown wild during her absence. She wore a simple green cotton dress that matched her eyes, and her brown hair was gathered in a braid adorned with small white flowers she had cut from the rose bushes. "Can I help?" he asked, approaching with 2 pairs of pruning shears. Hope looked at him and smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face in a way he hadn't seen since before that terrible night. "Of course, the wisteria needs a lot of work." They worked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts but aware of the other's presence. It was a simple, everyday activity, but it had something profoundly healing about it. It was as if they were rebuilding not only the garden, but also the trust between them. "Hope," Ethan finally said, stopping his work to look at her, "have you thought about what happens next?" She stopped cutting too, but didn't look up from the flowers. "After Mrs. Eleanor, yes, I've thought a lot about it," she answered carefully. "And I have to be honest with you, I don't know. Part of me wants to stay, to build something with you, to see if we can heal what was broken. But another part of me is scared." "Scared of what?" Hope finally looked at him, and in her green eyes was a vulnerability that broke his heart. "Scared that when the emotions settle, when the gratitude for finding the truth fades, you'll realize we're not really compatible, that we come from worlds that are too different." Ethan set the shears on the ground and moved closer to her. "Hope, our worlds are different, yes, but that doesn't mean we're incompatible. It means that together we can create something new, something better than either of our individual worlds. And what if it doesn't work? What if after a few months you realize you miss your old life, your freedom, the women from your social circle?" Hope's questions revealed wounds deeper than Ethan had imagined. He realized it wasn't just about repairing the trust that had broken that night. It was about healing years of insecurity, of feeling inferior, of believing she didn't deserve true love. "Can I tell you something about my old life?" he asked, taking her dirt-stained hands in his. "About the women from my social circle I knew?" Hope nodded, though her posture tensed slightly. "For years I dated women my family considered appropriate, women educated in private schools, who spoke 3 languages, who knew which fork to use for every course of a formal dinner. Trish was one of them. Ethan paused, organizing his thoughts. Do you know what they all had in common? None of them really saw me. They saw my last name, my bank account, my utility as a husband, but when I was with them I felt empty, like I was playing a role in a play I hadn't chosen. And with me it's different. With you, Ethan smiled, bringing one of Hope's hands to his face. With you, I feel real. When you look at me, I see in your eyes the man I want to be, not the man others expect me to be. When I talk to you, I don't have to calculate my words or worry about impressing you. I can just be. Hope felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had carried for so long she had forgotten what it was like to live without it. Ethan, and as for the differences in our worlds, he continued, those differences make me better. Your gentleness teaches me compassion. Your practical wisdom connects me to reality. Your quiet strength inspires me. I don't want a woman who is a female version of me. I want a woman who completes me. For a moment, Hope allowed herself to believe it could be that simple, that love could conquer class differences, past wounds, future fears. But then, like a cloud passing in front of the sun, a shadow of doubt crossed her face. There's something else you need to know, she said, pulling her hands away and taking a step back. Ethan felt a sudden coldness in his stomach. What is it? During these months I was away, I met someone. The words fell between them like stones in a silent pond, creating shock waves that expanded to touch everything they had been building. His name is Mike, Hope continued, unable to meet his eyes. He's the son of the owners of the lodge where I worked. He's 30, a veterinarian, and he fell in love with me. Ethan felt as if he'd been punched in the gut, but he forced himself to remain composed. And you, did you fall in love with him? No, Hope answered immediately, then corrected herself. Not in the way that, not like I fell in love with you, but I grew to care for him deeply. He was kind to me, treated me like I was something precious, made me laugh. So what happened? Hope finally looked at him, tears in her eyes. He asked me to marry him. A week ago, the night before you arrived. Ethan's world stopped. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed time to think, that there were things from my past I needed to resolve before I could commit to any future. Ethan realized he was holding his breath. And now? Now that you know the truth about Trish, about the fake letters, about us, now I'm more confused than ever, Hope admitted, the tears finally spilling over. Mike represents security, tranquility, a simple life without complications. With you there will always be drama, questions, people who think I don't deserve to be by your side. But who do you love? The question hung between them like a sword over their heads. Hope closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there was a brutal honesty in them that broke his heart. I love you, she whispered. I have always loved you. Even when I thought we were siblings, even when I hated myself for loving you, even during these months when I tried to forget you, it has always been you. Ethan felt as if he could breathe again, but his relief was short-lived. But loving someone isn't always enough, she continued. Sometimes love isn't the wisest choice, or the safest, or the one that causes the least pain in the long run. What are you saying? Hope wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving smudges of dirt on her cheeks. I'm saying that Mike is waiting for me, that he promised if I came back to him by the end of the month, we would build a life together, a good, quiet life, where I would never have to doubt my place in the world. And are you going back to him? I don't know, she answered, with an honesty that was more painful than any lie could have been. It depends on a lot of things, on how I feel when Mrs. Eleanor, after she's at rest, on whether you can truly forgive me for considering another man, on whether I can forgive you for doubting me. Ethan approached her again, slowly, as if she were a frightened animal that might flee at any moment. Hope, there's nothing to forgive. You had every right in the world to seek happiness after what happened. The fact that you found someone who valued you it's what should have happened. You're not jealous? I'm shattered, he admitted with a sad smile, but I'm also grateful that you found kindness when I couldn't give it to you. Mike sounds like a good man. He is. He's everything a woman could want in a husband. Except he's not me. The simplicity of the statement struck them both. It wasn't arrogant or possessive. It was simply the truth. Mike might be perfect in every way, but he wasn't Ethan, and Hope could be perfectly happy with Mike, but it wouldn't be the same kind of fiery, transformative happiness she felt with Ethan. Hope, Ethan said, taking her face in his hands, I'm not going to ask you to choose. I'm not going to pressure you or manipulate you or make promises I can't keep. I'm just going to ask you for one thing. What? Give me until my mother passes to show you who I really am, not the man who was stupid enough to doubt you, but the man I can be when I trust completely in love. And after that, if you decide Mike is the better choice for you, I'll help you pack your things myself. Hope looked at him for a long moment, studying every line of his face, every nuance of sincerity in his blue eyes. "And if I decide to stay, then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision." Before Hope could answer, William appeared at the garden gate, his face grave and urgent. "Sir, Miss Hope," he said in a trembling voice, "you'd better come. The missus is asking for you." They ran toward the house, their hands instinctively intertwining as they climbed the stairs. In Mrs. Eleanor's room, they found she had awakened from her sleep and was more alert than she had been in days. "Ah, there are my two lovebirds," she said, her voice weak but with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "Come here. I have something important to tell you." They approached the bed, each taking one of Mrs. Eleanor's hands. She looked from one to the other, as if memorizing their faces. "I've lived 75 years in this world," she began, "and if I've learned anything, it's that true love isn't something you find every day. It's rare, precious, and it doesn't always arrive when we expect it or in the way we plan." She paused to catch her breath, clearly making an effort to continue. "You two have found something special. I saw it from the moment Hope arrived at this house. The way you looked at each other when you thought no one was watching. The way my son's eyes lit up when she entered the room. How Hope's voice softened when she spoke of him." "Mrs. Eleanor," Hope interrupted gently, "don't exert yourself. Hush, child. Let me finish. This might be the last chance I get to say this." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed both their hands with surprising strength. "Mistakes are made, hearts are broken, trust is damaged. But if the love is real, if it's the kind that transcends circumstances and survives storms, then it's worth fighting for, it's worth forgiving for, it's worth risking for." Her eyes turned specifically to Hope. "Child, I know you're afraid. I know there's another man offering you an easier life. But the easy life isn't always the life we're meant for. Sometimes we're destined for extraordinary lives, and extraordinary is never easy." Then she looked at Ethan. "And you, my son, you have to understand that love requires not just passion but courage. The courage to trust even when you're afraid, to defend the one you love even when it's inconvenient, to choose the heart over the head, again and again." Mrs. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her last strength. "I can't decide for you, but I can tell you that if you let fear separate you this time, if you allow the wounds of the past to destroy the promise of the future, you will regret it for the rest of your lives. And I," a faint smile crossed her face, "I will not rest in peace, knowing you didn't fight for what you have." Mrs. Eleanor's words settled over them like a blessing and a prophecy. In the silence that followed, they all knew that something fundamental had been said, something that would change everything that came after. That night, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes fell asleep for the last time, a smile on her lips and the hands of her two most beloved people holding hers as she crossed into eternity. And in that room filled with sadness and love, Ethan and Hope finally understood that the time for doubt was over, that their love had been tested by fate itself, and now they had to decide if they were brave enough to claim it. Do you think true love can overcome social differences and past wounds? Have you ever had to choose between security and passion? Tell us your experience in the comments. Let us know which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to learn Hope's final decision. Chapter 6, Part 6. The days following Mrs. Eleanor's death were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The funeral was understated but beautiful, held in the historic local church where the Hayes family had worshipped for generations. Hope had insisted on preparing the flowers herself, creating arrangements with the white roses and wisteria Mrs. Eleanor had loved so much, combining them with aromatic herbs that, according to her hometown traditions, would help the soul find peace in the afterlife. During the service, Ethan and Hope sat together in the front row, united in their grief but also in a silent understanding that they were bidding farewell, not only to an extraordinary woman, but also to the last barrier that stood between them and their destiny. The church was filled with people who had known and respected Mrs. Eleanor, business leaders, hotel employees, neighbors from the town, and surprisingly, many humble women who had been quietly helped by the Hayes matriarch's generosity over the years. Hope was surprised to learn that Mrs. Eleanor had silently funded the education of dozens of young people, paid for medical treatments for families in need, and been an anonymous benefactor to several regional orphanages. "I didn't know she helped so many people," Hope murmured to Ethan as they watched the procession of mourners pass by the casket to pay their respects. "She never talked about those things," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She used to say that true charity is done in silence." After the burial, when the last guests had departed and the ranch had once again fallen into silence, Ethan and Hope found themselves alone in the library, surrounded by the books Mrs. Eleanor had loved and the memories of the afternoons they had spent there together. Hope stood by the window overlooking the garden, watching the first shadows of evening stretch across the flowers they had tended to together. She wore a simple black dress that enhanced the paleness of her skin and made her green eyes shine with an almost supernatural intensity. Ethan approached slowly until he was standing behind her. He could feel the warmth of her body, inhale the subtle scent of her perfume mixed with that of the flowers that always seemed to accompany her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About everything she taught us," Hope replied without turning. "About love, about family, about the courage to fight for what really matters." "And what really matters, Hope?" This time she turned to face him, and in her green eyes was a clarity he hadn't seen before, as if Mrs. Eleanor's passing had burned away all the secondary doubts and fears, leaving only the essential truth. "This," she said simply, making a gesture that encompassed not just the room, but everything between them. "Us. What we feel for each other." Ethan felt his heart expand in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Mike is a wonderful man who deserves a woman who will love him completely, without reservation, without pieces of her heart belonging to someone else." Hope took a step toward him, closing the distance between them. "I'm saying I've spent too much time being afraid of love, trying to protect myself from the possibility of being hurt, when I should have been fighting for what I want." "And what do you want?" "I want you," she replied without hesitation. "I want mornings with you in this house. I want to tend the garden we planted together. I want Sundays reading in the library while you play the piano. I want nights talking about our dreams and our fears. I want the imperfect, complicated, extraordinary life we can build together." Ethan took her in his arms then, holding her as if she were something precious that could break if he wasn't careful. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? Because if you say yes, if you tell me you're going to stay with me, I'm never letting you go again." "I'm sure," she whispered against his chest, "and there's something else you need to know." Ethan tensed slightly, bracing for another revelation that could change everything. "I already called Mike," Hope continued. "I told him the truth about us, about what I feel for you. It was difficult. He's a good man, and hurting him was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do." "How did he take it?" "With more grace than I deserved," she admitted sadly. "He told me he had always known there was someone else in my past, someone who held a piece of my heart that he could never touch. He told me he hoped I would be brave enough to fight for it." Ethan felt a pang of guilt mixed with gratitude for the man who had cared for Hope when he could not. "I'd like to meet him someday, to thank him." "Maybe," Hope smiled. "He's the kind of man who could forgive even that." They held each other in silence for several minutes, feeling the last pieces of their broken hearts clicking back into place. Outside, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that filtered through the library windows. "Hope," Ethan finally said, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. "There's something I want to ask you." "What?" Instead of answering with words, Ethan stepped away from her and walked to the antique mahogany desk where Mrs. Eleanor used to write her letters. He opened the top drawer and took out a small navy blue velvet box that had been waiting for the right moment for weeks. When he turned back to Hope, she had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hope. "Hope, Grace Miller," he began, kneeling on the marble floor of the library. "In the year I've known you, you taught me what it truly means to love someone. In the 6 months you were gone, I learned what it truly means to lose someone. And now that you're here, now that we know nothing can separate us except our own fears, I want to ask you something." He opened the box, revealing an engagement ring he had chosen carefully. A classic, but not ostentatious diamond solitaire, set on a simple and elegant white gold band. It was beautiful without being intimidating, valuable without being vulgar. "Will you marry me?" Hope stared at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. For a moment, Ethan feared he had misinterpreted her earlier words, that perhaps she wasn't ready for such a big commitment so quickly. But then she knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, I will marry you." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger with slightly trembling hands, and when it fit perfectly, they both knew it was more than a coincidence. It was as if it had been waiting for her all her life. "I love you," he said, kissing the hands that now wore his ring. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone." "And I love you," she replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. "In spite of everything we've been through, or maybe because of it." They kissed then with the passion of two people who had been lost and were finally found, with the tenderness of two souls who had been wounded and had learned the value of forgiveness, with the promise of two hearts that had decided to face the future together, no matter what it might bring. When they parted, they were both crying, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of hope finally fulfilled. "When?" Hope asked, admiring how the ring caught the evening light. "Whenever you want," Ethan replied. "Tomorrow, if it were possible." Hope laughed, a sound like tiny bells that filled the library with music, more beautiful than any piano. "I think William might have something to say about that. You know how he is with traditions." "Speaking of William," Ethan said with a mischievous grin, "I have a suspicion he already knows what just happened." As if on cue, William appeared at the library door with a bottle of French champagne and 3 glasses on a silver tray. "Am I interrupting anything important?" he asked with a smile that suggested he knew exactly what he was interrupting. "William?" Hope laughed, getting up and running to hug him. "How did you know?" "Miss Hope," the old gardener replied, returning the hug with fatherly affection. "I've been looking after this family for 30 years. I know when true love is in the air." Ethan came over and placed a hand on William's shoulder. "Will you be my best man?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. "It would be an honor, sir. An honor and a privilege." They toasted then, the 3 of them together in the library, where so much of their story had begun. As outside, the stars began to appear in the clear Texas sky. The wedding was held 6 weeks later, in the gardens of the estate that Hope had restored with so much love. It was an intimate but beautiful celebration, with only the most important people in their lives. William as Ethan's best man, Hope's favorite cousin who had traveled from North Carolina to be her maid of honor, a few employees from the hotels who had become true friends, and several of the former beneficiaries of Mrs. Eleanor's secret charity who had insisted on being present to honor her memory. Hope walked down the makeshift aisle under the century-old pecan tree, wearing the wedding dress that had belonged to Mrs. Eleanor, perfectly altered for her smaller frame. It was ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, a dress that had waited decades for the right woman to wear it. Ethan waited for her under an arch of white roses and wisteria, dressed in a dark gray suit that made his blue eyes shine like sapphires. When he saw her approaching on William's arm in her father's absence, he knew that all the mistakes, all the pain, all the separation had been worth it to get to this moment. The ceremony was officiated by Reverend Michael, the same pastor who had recommended Hope for the job at the estate a year ago. In his sermon, he spoke about how true love is not the absence of difficulties, but the choice to face those difficulties together, to grow through them, to allow them to make us stronger and wiser. When it was time to exchange vows, Ethan spoke first. "Hope," he began, his voice clear but thick with emotion, "when you came into my life, I didn't know I was only half living. You taught me that love isn't just a feeling, but a choice you make every day. You taught me that true strength isn't in guarding your heart, but in opening it completely to another person. I promise to choose you every day, to trust you even when the world tries to sow doubt, and to love you not just in the easy moments, but especially in the hard ones. I promise to be the man you deserve, not just today, but every day of our lives together." Hope had to wipe away tears before she could speak, but when she did, her voice was strong and sure. "Ethan," she said, looking him directly in the eyes, "you taught me that I deserve to be loved completely, without conditions, without reservations. You taught me that I don't have to make myself small to fit into someone else's life, that I can be completely myself and still be worthy of love. I promise to trust us even when circumstances seem impossible, to fight for us when others try to tear us apart, and to love you not just with my heart, but with my entire soul. I promise to be your partner in every adventure, your refuge in every storm, and your best friend every single day of our lives." When they kissed to seal their vows, it was as if the entire garden lit up. The flowers seemed brighter, the birds sang more sweetly, and even the air seemed more fragrant. The reception was held on the main terrace of the estate, with food prepared by Hope and some friends from her hometown who had traveled for the occasion. There was music from a string quartet, but also moments of contemplative silence as guests shared stories about Mrs. Eleanor and toasted her memory. When it was time for the couple's first dance, Ethan led Hope to the center of the terrace as the quartet began to play At Last. As they danced slowly under the string lights that William had hung especially for the occasion, Ethan whispered in Hope's ear, "You know what I'm thinking." "What?" she murmured, lost in the happiness of the moment. "I think my mother is here somehow. I think she's smiling." Hope looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the purple twilight sky. "I think so too, and I think she's proud of us for not giving up. You know what else I'm thinking?" "What?" "I think this is just the beginning, that the best years of our lives are ahead of us." Hope smiled, that radiant smile that had captured his heart from the very first day. "I agree, and I can't wait to live every single one of them with you." 2 years later, when their first child was born, a little girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, they named her Eleanor, in honor of the woman who had made their love possible. And when little Ellie began to walk, her first steps were toward the rose bush that Hope had planted, as if she knew instinctively that therein resided the spirit that had blessed her parents' union. The Hayes estate was once again filled with life, with laughter, with music. Ethan expanded the family hotels, but also established a foundation in his mother's memory that offered educational scholarships and medical care to families in need. Hope opened a school for herbal medicine and wellness in a renovated wing of the estate, where she taught other women the knowledge she had inherited from her grandmother and perfected over the years. And in the evenings, when the day's work was done, they would sit together in the garden they had rebuilt with their own hands, watching their children play among the flowers, knowing they had created something beautiful, not just for themselves, but for the generations to come. William, now officially the adoptive grandfather to the Hayes children, often joined them on those quiet evenings, telling stories of the old days and smiling as he saw how love had transformed not just two lives, but an entire family, an entire home, an entire legacy. "You know what I believe?" Hope said to Ethan one evening as they watched little Ellie and her younger brother James chase butterflies among the roses. "What do you believe?" he asked, putting an arm around her shoulders. "I believe your mother was right about something she told me just before she died." "What was that?" "She said that sometimes we're destined for extraordinary lives, and that extraordinary is never easy. But she also told me something else, something I haven't told you until now." Ethan looked at her with curiosity. "What?" "She told me that the strongest women aren't the ones who never break, but the ones who break and then rebuild themselves, more beautiful than before. Like a mosaic made of broken pieces that, when put together correctly, create something more beautiful than the original object was." Ethan thought about those words, about everything they had suffered and overcome together. "I think she was right. We are stronger together than we ever were apart. And happier," Hope added, leaning in to kiss her husband as their children played around them, as the flowers they planted together perfumed the air, as the future stretched out before them like a road full of promise. In the distance, if they had known how to look, they might have seen the translucent figure of an elegant silver-haired woman, watching them with a smile of complete satisfaction, knowing that her last act on earth had been to unite two souls who were destined to be together through thick and thin until the end of time. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful story of love, forgiveness, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a comment telling us which part moved you the most and what city you're following from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that speak directly to the heart, and share this story with someone you think might need a reminder that true love always finds a way. Do you have an idea for a new story? Share it in the comments. We love creating content that resonates with our followers. Give this a like if you believe Hope and Ethan deserve their happy ending, and tell us, what are your thoughts on the power of forgiveness in relationships? Have you ever experienced a love story that overcame great obstacles? Until the next story, dear romantics.